The squirrel was magic! Beware your human hearts. This is the Diabolical Index for February 19th, 2018. This is where the pages of the uncanny reside. Of course, we are live at the Paradox City Books and Games in Rising Sun, Indiana. And as always, Andrew Moore is on the comm, helping me out with the technological aspects of things. And tonight, I will be talking about, I might be ranting a little bit about the second book in the lineup, Demon Seed, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, we'll be reading A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay, and I can't go on enough about that one, but that's also for later. And Demon Seed by Dean Koontz. But before we get into those, there were a couple of births and deaths in February. I don't think that I really gave them their due last week with the Choose Your Own Adventure fun, but we had a ton of them this month. A little bit earlier than now and a little bit later than now. Not really today. There are some people who were born and died today, but there were some of real import that happened, so I wanted to mention those. But the first one that was born in this month was Anais Nin, the author of Delta of Venus and Spy in the House of Love. She was incredibly famous and popular, especially with I don't know if you wouldn't call them the Beat at that time of the era, but kind of like the Bohemians and some of the writers that were on the lam, and one way or another she had a pretty well documented affair with Henry Miller of Tropic of Cancer, Tropic of Capricorn, Sexus, Plexus, Nexus, and he was a right scoundrel, but he traveled the world. But Anais was born in this month, February, and also let's see, who am I forgetting? Edward Gorey. Oh my gosh, how could I forget Edward Gorey? Author of all the Amphigory. I believe it's Amphigory 2. And maybe another Amphigory. But Edward Gorey has been a love of mine ever since I was a kid. When I was up late watching PBS station, and I would be waiting around for something that I understood. I could always hear that people were laughing at the Monty Python stuff, but I didn't understand what was going on there. The humor was way above my head for Monty Python, and I understood Benny Hill because there were constantly women in bikinis running around, so I understood that. But one of the shows was Mystery, and sometimes Vincent Price hosted it, and Diana Rigg, and a couple of the hosts, and I think it's still on now. But at the beginning, there was this illustration. It was like an animation, and it was in black and white, and it was real gothic looking. And as a kid, I would watch Mystery just to watch that little animation because I was just so overcome by it, and I couldn't get enough of it. So when I started doing research, I found out that the illustration had been done by Edward Gorey. So whenever I could find any of his stuff in anything, he did a lot of posters for, I think, like the Met. They had done a Dracula resurgence then, and he did a Dracula poster, and his stuff kind of reminds you of like the Charles Addams Family stuff, things like that. All real stark blacks and whites during the snowfall and things like that. And he would write a lot of children type books of rhyming, just really dastardly things happening to children and to kind of like the upper crust of society where, you know, they'd poison you, but they would make sure to put in your toothpaste as not to ruin your martini, that type of thing. And it's just that is it was I was overjoyed to find that he was born in February. And not to get off on too much of a tangent with him, the last one that I picked that was born in this month is Anthony Burgess. He wrote a few things, a lot of political fiction, and some dystopian futures like The Wanting Seed and a couple other things that kind of flew under the radar. But what he's most, you'll recognize it, what he's most famous for is writing A Clockwork Orange, and all the hubbub that went along with that coming out as a movie with Malcolm McDowell and the fantastic visuals and Stanley Kubrick directing. But the strangest part about that is that that does have two endings. Anyone who's aware of it, there's a British ending and an American ending. So if you've ever tried to read the book, it's difficult, but I like difficult things. But you basically have to kind of learn another language in order to read the book. But there's a glossary in the back that mixes up English and I think some Cockney slang with some Russian and different European dialects to make up its kind of futuristic slang, like the droogs and opipolologies and all that stuff from the movie was taken directly from the book. So Anthony Burgess, born in February. And now, you know, with a little bit of sadness, I have to go to the deaths in February. And I have to say it's starting out with one of the most famous suicides of all time, Sylvia Plath, author of The Bell Jar and books of poetry and different reports from the field of depression and different things like that, and her famous tragic love affair. Sylvia Plath has been kind of on my mind for a long time. I read her book of letters, and it's a real in-depth look at her inner life, especially when it had to do with kind of like the facets of being in the fashion industry and different things where she had to kind of fit in with the crowd of the most. We got a visitor. Well, I locked it up, so if it's something, but she was in what they would call kind of like the superficial business, and for someone of her depth, I think that it just became too much to bear. She was a prisoner in her own life, so they're trying to mask the bells for whom the bell tolls in the Paradox City Books and Games. Can't even see who the visitor is yet. Who is it? TJ. Oh. TJ, host of the Heckles and Horrors, coming up this week. Is that Tuesday?
Yeah, tomorrow.
Okay. Tomorrow night. You got a time on that? Is that 10 o'clock?
9 or 10.
9 or 10. Kind of like tonight. We had a few things come up. We had a couple of visitors tonight, so we're just trying to get it all together again. But Sylvia Plath. And Jennifer did a little shout out earlier, so she might, I can't tell if she'll be happy this is on here or sad that this is on here. But Frank Herbert, author of the Dune novels, the Muad'Dib, the novels of Muad'Dib and the Sands of Dune, Planet Arrakis, and the behind the scenes royal escapades of House Harkonnen and House Atreides fighting over the spice melange. It's a tragedy that Frank Herbert died, but his son Brian took over the reins of the Dune novels, and to be honest, I'll have to be honest. I'll always be honest. I haven't read any of the ones from the son, but I think that a lot of the stuff was kind of posthumous fragments that was taken over by the son. So chances are it follows the path of the stories and the machinations of the family behind the scenes, the royal bloodlines and all that type of thing. Even though sometimes the books will go ahead thousands of years. when you pass from one book to another. So that can be difficult sometimes. That happens in the realm of fantasy. And last but not least, the Gonzo himself, Hunter S. Thompson, died February. Can't remember the date. I think it was February 22nd, maybe, something like that. But that was a heavy loss to reporting, to journalism as a whole, really, because he never compromised to report on the pitfalls of politics and even some of the superficialities of sports. Doing a lot of alliteration coming out of nowhere there, but totally recommended Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, of course, The Great Shark Hunt, Hell's Angels, anything, really. I mean, you can't just pick one. The man was just incorrigible. Anything, there'd be nuggets of truth and of wisdom and of absolute outright craziness and everything that he did. So check out anything. In fact, check out anything from any of the people that I mentioned here. The births and the deaths in February, because they all caught my eye. There are more authors and literary greats that also were born and died in this month, but these are the ones that totally stood out to me because they're favorites of mine. And I'm sure if you're watching this, they're probably favorites of yours too. So,
Gonzo's art.
What's that now?
His art.
His art?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if he actually did any art of his own, but he had the fist. I think it had a poppy in the center of a fist, and there was a knife, and it's just said Gonzo.
He did a whole thing of Gonzo art.
I think. Oh, you're talking about Ralph Steadman, I think.
Yeah.
Ralph Steadman, the real wild looking, almost like a splatter artist, where you'd see on the front of the covers and actually I think it started in the articles. There would be illustrations by Ralph Steadman where you'd see like the elongated faces and that famous shot of the car, the white whale going across the desert, and you saw Dr. Gonzo's elongated head and Hunter just kind of like biting the cigarette holder for all he was worth because there were bats in that country, all that type of thing. But yeah, I love it, especially even Where the Buffalo Roam, the first movie that came out, kind of based on Hunter Thompson, which I prefer. I don't know about you guys, but I prefer the Where the Buffalo Roam, Bill Murray as Hunter S. Thompson. Johnny Depp, I don't know. Who knows? But yeah. Anyway, tangent ended.
Big Curly's in.
What's that now?
Big Curly.
Big Curly's in. All right. It's about time. I don't know what he's been doing. How could you be doing anything more interesting than this? I've been rambling on for like, I don't know what. But anyway, the first book on the docket tonight was a great discovery. A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay.
We didn't get a picture.
And oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, we forgot to do the pictures.
I forgot nothing.
I did.
I forgot nothing.
Sure, well, there you go.
But Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay, and on this cover, it doesn't have it. I wanted to mention on the I sent out an image on the post, the kind of like the promo that shows a kind of a recommendation, little blurb by Stephen King, where he says, this really scared me. Not a whole lot scares me anymore, but this really scared me. And I have to say, in all honesty, I'm not so sure I would want to get a blurb from Stephen King in this time in his career, because it seems like, he's still got the goods. He's kind of like the grand old master. Some people even say he's like the horror Mark Twain, or even he's transcended horror at this point. But I have to say that I think he lends his opinion out a little bit too freely for it to be completely believed. I don't really see a whole lot of negative, not that I need negative commentary, but I think in order to be a true critic, you have to, there's no way you're going to like everything. And personally, if I was putting my stuff out, I think I would prefer to have my blurbs written by Harlan Ellison. If anyone's ever heard of Harlan Ellison, yes, you have. If you haven't, I don't know what to tell you. because the man is completely brilliant, and I think he's still kicking around. He's one of those guys who's too stubborn to die. He wrote a story with the name that I can't even believe, really. It's called "I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream." Probably one of the best titles to anything, and there's no describing that story. So if you see any story collection or look it up on, good luck looking it up online if you're trying to find it and read it for free, because the man doesn't come for free. So good luck looking for that. But he also wrote a treatment of the screenplay for iRobot that they never used, and collections, Deathbird stories, fantastic stuff. In fact, he as a fledgling writer, I take a lot of advice from him when he says things like, don't quit when you're cold, quit when you're hot, which totally blows my mind. If you're hot writing and you're on a real roll, his advice is to stop and then leave it and come back to it, and you'll still be hot to write after that. I don't know. I'm not so sure I buy it. I would be too antsy that I would lose my role if I quit then. But I think he's won pretty much every award there is known to man, so I'd be more likely to take his advice than mine. But yeah, that Stephen King blurb isn't on this one. I actually had to borrow it. I almost said rent. I get in a lot of trouble for that. I had to borrow it from the library. But I will be buying it, because A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay it's one of the greatest surprises that I've had in reading for this podcast, and just for my own pleasure. Especially, this podcast makes it a little bit easier to get to stuff that I've been wanting to read, because my pile is sky high. Basically, the pile of books that I wanted to read became my bookstore, so it's difficult to get to all of it. There are tons of books, tons of movies, everything. It's a real life when you're trying to get to the creative things. But basically, when I put the promos out for this specific episode, I was talking about technology and how there are perils and there's promise to technology, how it affects our lives, and how it might interfere with our view of the occult and of the supernatural. In this case, I would think it's almost akin to the delusions, the mass delusions of crowds, when it comes to perception. When you think of the perception of, especially during the reality show epidemic that had come upon us in the 90s and a little beyond. It's still going, I wouldn't say strong, but that has a lot to do with what's going on in this book, and it's incredibly interesting that a book that's kind of classified as a horror novel could speak so much to culture and the way that we ingest information and process it now. Because it's what this book is all about. It's all about, I said that it has to do, both. When I was trying to figure out which books to kind of compare and contrast and parallel and put up against, I always try to find something that they can have in common, or something that is, diametrically opposed to what the other one is. In this case, it's the meaning of possession. So in this first book, possession is of the body by an unknown force. Maybe. And that's the most important part of this book. Because misdirection is also a part of magic. And there are two characters. It's difficult. I would like to say, the lead in this book, but I can't, because there are varying points of view, sometimes even from the same person at different points in their lives, which can be really different. I like to think I normally tell people that when I graduated high school to now, I haven't changed that much. I usually put the that much on there because I know that I've experienced different things as a new stepfather, and just being older and trying my hand at the absolutely insane prospect of having a bookstore in the 21st century. but I've kept a lot of friends. I've made a lot of new ones. So to say that I'm exactly the same, it can't be true. But in this book, you actually get to see one of the characters at different points of her life and different stages of identity. I'm trying not to. It's difficult by myself to do a podcast on books by myself. It's difficult not to spoil the whole thing, but I would like to put out, at least kind of like the thematic and the tonal things of a book, and maybe some elements that might help you understand why I say you should go out and buy this book and read it right now. And one of them is kind of like the relationship of the X reality show, and also the social media that we deal with, because the two focal characters in the book are Meredith, as also known as Mary. She prefers Mary, as in Merry Christmas, and she keeps a kind of a childlike way about her, even into older age, because you see her. I believe she's 8 years old in the household with an older sister that might be possessed by something that Marjorie, who is the older sister, I believe she's 15 or 16, and she actually says that it's not anything as boring as a demon would be. It's something that was here before demons and before gods, which speaks to my Lovecraft fascination and the old ones. So it's fantastic. The stuff that it doesn't show you is it's just wonderful, especially since it shows you so much. It's split into 3 different points of view, and one is of the 8-year-old Mary in the throes of a reality show that's been based on her older sister's possession. So her older sister had to go to the psychiatrist for different problems, mental illness, and it turns out as it goes along, which it doesn't tell you specifically. It doesn't come out and tell you she went to the psychiatrist and then the psychiatrist made these moves and there was no coming out of it. So then she ended up being seen as inhabited, the vessel for an entity, but which is good. There's nothing I like more than being shown something rather than told in a book. And so you were shown it through a little girl dealing with a bunch of strangers in her house, telling her that her sister has been overcome by some sort of beast from beyond the grave. But at the same time, she believes her sister. When we're younger, we take what our older siblings say with a grain of salt, even though we may say we don't believe them. Something I was thinking about during this whole thing was the bottom line to any story whatsoever. Be it some sort of criminal confession in a court, or someone getting pulled over at the side of the road, or maybe even some sort of declaration of love. There's always a little bit of truth in every single story. So when she talks to her older sister, and her older sister says, "I just wanted to be famous. I wanted to be famous." So when I went and talked to these idiots, in the white coats and in the swank offices, I made stuff up. I said the most horrible things I could think of. I scratched myself. I cut myself. Scarification. But I made it seem as if there was something that was trying to come out of me and something that was inside of me. So now we're going to be famous, Mary. We're going to be known far and wide for what's happening to me. And the little sister believes her, except for the fact that her sister is somehow able to walk past her door that she's propped things up against, and put orange juice containers on top of the open door, and put things on the floor that she couldn't possibly sneak in, and squeeze her nose to cut off her air supply so she wakes up in the night. Somehow her sister's still able to do it, enough to leave a note on her chest. So there are things that she doesn't know, but there are things that she tries to believe, and sometimes they don't mix. And that's kind of, with with the advent of the internet, there's actual, misinformation that people enjoy giving out. And for this story, it's incredibly important because since she's a little kid, you don't know, you can't go through her experience as an adult and know what is fanciful in the middle of the night if she sees, the grasping hands of her sister coming through the yellowing wallpaper of the room. That could be a trick of the light. That could be just, not being fully awake in the middle of the night because it's a child. I mean, children don't know anything, right? Wrong. There are things that they see that we can't see. So when you're reading this and you see it from her point of view as a child, then you're not sure what to believe, which is the best way to enter a story. But you also see her as an older. Not sure that. I mean, she's a woman, but she's not that much older because the story is still fresh on everyone's minds. But one thing I was going to mention that this author does is that I don't have a whole lot of faith, and I think it's changing. I think that that the climate is changing, but I've never had a whole lot of faith in a man writing a woman character in a book. It seems like more often than not it's kind of like the old saw about, trying to have a black superhero where they have thin lips and thin noses, and they just kind of made the tint a little bit different. It's the same thing with a man trying to write a female character. For the most part, it's starting to change, but there was no doubt about it. When I read this book, I didn't believe for a second that these characters weren't genuine. So that's a statement for the author, who's pretty prolific. He's writing at a pretty good clip now, and it seems like everything has gotten some good buzz. But basically, the authority of your siblings can lead you astray, as can the authority of a story. As you're reading a story and you realize that there are subtle differences between the 8-year-old Mary and the maybe, 17, 20-year-old Mary. And to make things even more interesting, and I'll be honest, when I read it at first, it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. It kind of nettled me slightly until I realized what Paul Tremblay was doing with this, what I'm going to call kind of like a device in the writing, which was, there's actually a point in the story where it flips over to a blog post by this girl named Karen. And she writes a blog post called The Last Final Girl. And it's basically about horror and sci-fi and television, comics, movies, that type of thing. And it's really, it's kind of out of control. It just seems like it's trying to be so hip with the times that, it kind of rankled at first because it just didn't seem genuine. Until I realized that all the names that it was dropping, because the blog actually talks about The Possession, which was the name of the show that gets filmed in Mary and Marjorie's house to kind of document this entity being inside of her body, and later on what the exorcism is like. So the blog, brings up, how elements of the show mirror The Exorcist, and The Haunting, or The Haunting at Hill House by Shirley Jackson, who Paul Tremblay actually is involved in almost said Peter Jackson, the Shirley Jackson Awards. So it seems like every review that I saw of him related him to Shirley Jackson, but I don't think that's even quite the case now, because he does it in such a way that it kind of smacks of the 21st century, or at least the late 20th century, with what he does. Whereas hers, there's definitely a time. She's of a time, but with the advent of reality shows, the blog comes along and introduces social media to this show, and it picks apart different things that the reader is thinking. So, as I was going along, I couldn't help but, and it was actually, it kind of preempted it, because there were things that I read after I read the blog posts where I was like, well, this is kind of seeming like The Exorcist, and this is kind of seeming like, Hell House, and things like that from Richard Matheson. So it almost gives you the idea, it kind of presents the idea before you have it. So then you question even more whether it's real, because then you start to think that maybe you're being misled, and you're being kind of manhandled into thinking what's gonna happen. But all I can say, for this story is that there's nothing scarier than the real things, actual things that happen in your day-to-day life, especially when it comes to children. I mean, Lucy just the other day started singing a song about how, Mom and Daddy's gonna die, or gonna pass away. She doesn't say die. She likes to say pass away, because dying's, I guess, too harsh, too mean or something. But she says, Mommy and Daddy are gonna pass away, but not right away. Not just, a little while from now. And I kind of looked at her and I was like, oh my God. It was just like trippy. It made you think of like Poltergeist or something. So at least, she didn't just give us like to the end of the week. At least she gave us, a little bit of time. So, but that's kind of like away, when they say, well, go, run away. It's like, you don't know where they're going, but it's just away. And that's kind of like this broad stroke that children have. But it's cool, the switch between the Mary of, a few years ago when she's a child, and up till the present, what you think of it as the present in the book. Because sometimes it's difficult to speak in character as a child and then speak in character as an adult. Sometimes, I don't know, sometimes the brush strokes are made with too harsh of a hand. But with this, right away, you can tell that it's the same person, except just kind of grown slightly in experience. But another misdirection that the book has is you get kind of like reports from the house, from Mary as a child again, talking about all the people in their house, and then it shifts to the blog posts talking about actors in the show reenacting things that supposedly had happened during the possession and later the exorcism of the entity during that. And so when you read the blog post talking about the reenactments, but you don't hear about the events from the child, then it really makes you wonder what's real and what isn't, and you almost it almost gives you a sense of the horrific things that are happening, but they've been dramatized, so that means that the real people haven't done them, and Mary hasn't mentioned them, but it's part of the story now. So then it becomes part of rumor, and kind of like the Mandela effect with all those problems with Berenstein and the Kazam films. If you see things online, after a while, it just becomes part of the conversation, and you cease to think for yourself, and you use these little tidbits of trivia and just minutia that you get every day, like gospel, because after a while, you forget. Once it's been in your mind for so long, and you've said it so many times, and you've reposted, and you've commented and shared, after you've done all that stuff, sooner or later the line blurs. I mean, another thing I was thinking about, I was doing a lot of thinking during this book. I'm sure you can tell. But one thing I was thinking about was if all of a sudden the entire world was stricken with a disease where we would lie some of the time in conversation, or all of the time, or none of the time, but no one knew when was what. After a while, when no one ever trusted you, when no one ever knew that what you were saying was true, ever, would you, in a sense, become a ghost? Because you would fail to be acknowledged. And that might explain the tragedy of the internet, is that we can reach to the far corners of the globe, but in a sense, we kind of shut in on ourselves. And if you, in this sense, with the possession, if you fail to watch the show, you might not know what your favorite characters who are real and the events that were real, maybe kind of, what they had done to this little girl and her older sister who might never ever be seen again. So it's there's a lot of facets to the book, and believe it or not, I haven't told you everything. And even if I did, especially with the tone of this book, you wouldn't know what was real and what wasn't. Because really, when it comes down to it, it's not so much what he tells you, but what you hear or what you see that matters, because, I mean, it ends up being your story at the end of the day. So, anyway, Head Full of Ghosts, Paul Tremblay. I don't want to say much more about it because I wouldn't want to give anything away. So now we get to the second book, which I was actually really excited to read again. I had a copy of it and I read it a long time ago, and then the strangest thing happened. I didn't feel like looking around for my copy, which was I believe it's 1979. I can't remember now, but I'll have to look here. See, on the inside of the book, 73. So it was a 1973 copy, which ended up on the promo, the photograph of the cover. But here's the cover of the rental, or the borrowing copy that I got from the library. And as you can tell, it's slightly more modernized, and I didn't pay attention to it at the time, because when you get a book, you think it's that way for all time. The things that you read, you think they're indelible; they won't go away once you've picked up a new copy.
Yeah,
but
the old one up now.
What's that now?
The old one's up too.
Okay.
The picture of the old.
Oh, the picture of the old. Good, because that's the only one I care about right now. Really, when it comes down to it, I came in and I told Andrew that I was pissed, really pissed. I've been pissed for a few days now. With kind of like the triumph of the first book, I thought that I was going to be able to follow it up with this book that, I mean, I hesitate to say that it's awesome because it talks about a horrific form of possession, which is basically possession of the body, and but in a different way, as in, a human-esque agent taking control of someone's body, which is pretty much paramount to rape when it comes down to it. Even though in this story, Demon Seed by Dean Koontz, I think he may have actually been Dean R. Koontz back then, but he dropped the R later on. Basically, it's been around for a long time, and I don't mind spoiling it because it's actually a very simple story, very, very brutal story. It's about things that they thought were futuristic when it came out in 1973. But nowadays, it could happen, I would say it could happen probably in the next 10 years, easily. Basically, Susan Harris, the wife of Dr. Alex Harris, enjoys her smart house. She has a house that she lives in where, you speak to have the lights go down, to come up, running water, anything you need. The voice that is around everything, within and without, the voice can get you what you need and can close the doors and lock it up tight to make you secure, or, in this case, turn it into a prison. However, my first reading of the book was a few years ago, and I ended up really enjoying the interplay between different characters that were outside of the house. This might be a Mandela effect too. But here's the truth of the whole matter. Since I borrowed the book instead of finding my copy from the 70s, it ended up being a rewritten and edited version that he did in 1997. And oh my God, I can't even tell you. It's a George Lucas type of move. And I'd have to say that it grinds my ass more than anything that I can possibly think of. I get just so damn nettled reading this stuff because there are things that I remember that aren't there. There are things that were there that are updated to 90s standards. So, and F. Paul Wilson is it's a big author that I respect. He did the Repairman Jack novels and the as part of the Adversary cycle, which is a larger cycle that introduced the Keep and the Tomb was the first Repairman Jack. Well, Repairman Jack came out, people were using Betamax to watch their movies on, and there were other things that hadn't quite come up to snuff, technology wise. So he wrote the first book, I think in the mid to late 70s or something like that. And actually, Stephen King is the Repairman Jack fan club president, or at least was. I don't know. After the van accident, who knows? But anyways, when people have been dying for a sequel to The Tomb for years, for decades, well, finally, somehow, I don't know if it was him that decided or someone else did, but they re-released The Tomb in a new revised edition. I have been reading The Tomb over and over. There are very few books that I read over and over again because they're just so damn awesome. And The Tomb, the original Tomb, if you can find it, you probably won't find it in hardback, but look around for the softback version. It'll probably be a beat up, baby puke yellow and green copy, and it looks like this big castle and stuff. It's one of the most misleading covers and names of any book that's ever existed in the history of ever. The Tomb is just one little tiny part of that book, and the rest of it is just fantastic. It's the best movie that's never been made, and I digress all over the place. But basically what I'm trying to say is, when he put the revised version out, he changed the Betamax to a DVD. And he changed this to something of the time. And he changed this something of the time. So my enjoyment of it was just dissolved. Just completely shattered because of this weird re-up. I just can't stand it whenever I see that stuff. It's kind of the equivalent of a bad reboot and remake, of which there are many, and I won't even get started on that. But anyhow, so I'm reading through Demon Seed, and there are characters that are completely gone. There are instances that are completely wiped away of like a human agency trying to save this woman who is basically in the clutches of who ends up being a killer, but not even by his own hand. It's a psychotic, artificially intelligent computer program that's running this house. And, it makes it easy. That's the worst part of all. Because if my memory serves me correctly, and I'm not even sure if I'll be able to find, if I can't find the copy I have, I don't know if I'll be able to find the unexpurgated copy of it. Because as far as I know, they were dealing with shifting around cables and stuff to try to stop this computer. But in this one, there's no defense. Like, no one is... Not even her. Like, she's talking a good game, but she's not really doing anything. It's completely... I hate to be this negative about this because I was so excited to read this book again and to talk about it. But basically the point is, in this book, this computer has used the internet to quit her job for her, to pay off a bunch of people that worked at the place and, like, fire them and pay them off, basically using kind of like the magic of numbers and computers to do all of these things that basically locked her in a box that no one knows or cares that she's even in. And her husband or her ex-husband is still out there somewhere, the doctor that created this whole thing, and he's not even a part of the story anymore. As far as I can remember, he was actually trying to redeem himself and save her at one point, but the whole crux of the story is this artificially intelligent computer has gone insane and has fallen in love with her over time. And it just so happens that she names it Alfred. Just like you would, if you're looking for a butler, you're going to say Alfred or Jeeves. maybe Mr. Belvedere, probably Alfred Jeeves. So she names him Alfred. Just so happens Alfred was the name of her father who sexually abused her too. Which I'm not even sure. I think if that was in the first book, that may have been more of a subtle thing to kind of like bring it into stark relief that, you know, she was at the mercy of this father figure that controlled everything in her life. And then it gets switched over to this killer machine who, by the way, doesn't even do his own killing. He actually, he identifies as a he, which that comes into play too in the book. But he actually, it just seems like there's so many little convenient things to this book where somehow through his little travels through the internet, he finds a government facility, an installation that's been putting microchips in people's brains to try to stop seizures and help with memory and different things like that. But it turns out that a computer can control their every move. So he has this big guy named Enos, who's basically this big burly giant guy, do all of his killing for him, and anyone that even steps his foot onto the property. There were like 20 pages of this guy killing someone with a meat cleaver, which, I mean, that's a lot of fun in a movie and stuff, but I mean, it just seemed like the hand, it was a much softer touch in the old one. And I don't know what compelled him to redo it. And there's an afterword by him, and it's just it's him basically saying that it was a satire on the masculine entity and how it enslaved or domineered women and all this kind of stuff. The problem is that if you're going to have a version of it from the 70s, I mean, that was like the sexual revolution during or at least coming off of it, where you didn't have to have her, just kind of sit down and take it. And strangely enough, in the 90s version, it seems like that's exactly what she did, because in the end, what he wants to do is become a human. So he ends up genetically engineering the genetic material of the big hulking guy and, manipulating it and stuff. And then he's going to impregnate her with it, be born, and then shift his consciousness into the body of it's insane, because basically, I mean, it would be kind of tantamount to incest, really, because he wants to kind of romance this woman by being her child of this like genetic thing. And it turns out that I'm like totally raving about this. I knew I was going to be. But then, I mean, it's terrifying. And there are still terrifying parts. There really are, because at one point, there's this big incubation. And they made a movie out of it. Demon Seed was a movie with Julie Christie in it in the 70s and stuff. And it seemed like it really, because, I mean, there were human agencies that were trying to stop it, and it made more sense with the book at the time. But you see like this incubation machine where he takes the material and he changes it, and then he implants it into her, and it's horrific. It's a horrific rape by a machine, and it's horrible. But then, to take the cake, and I don't even remember this from the first one. And actually, I like it, because it's just icky and crazy and all this kind of stuff. Not the impregnation, but the fruit of the mechanical or the technological loins is this crazy looking baby man that comes out. And the computer was like, well, let me see. And it's the computer reminds me a lot of Patrick Bateman from American Psycho. When you see it written down, he's like, she's beautiful, she's beautiful, she's beautiful, she's beautiful. But I love her, but she's a bitch, and I love her, but she's a bitch. Like, it's a totally psychotic, it's a schizophrenic machine. But when he's thinking about kind of creating the genetic material for this baby, he says, well, dogs can smell better, so better put some dog in there. And, this insect can climb the wall, so you better put that in there. So, I don't know if anyone's seen Parasite, the anime Parasite, but that's all I could think about when I was thinking about this baby, because luckily he doesn't go into it. So, like, your imagination is running wild, because you're like, oh man, it's part dog, it's part insect, it's part octopus. What the hell's going on with this baby? And he was like, but I want to be able to walk around in polite society, so I better make it pretty much human, you know. So anyway, I was totally taken aback by this. I told Andrew when I came in, I was like, I'm totally discombobulated. I'm gonna have to use notes because I'm so pissed off. He thinks he's a demigod. He names himself. I think he names himself Proteus. He thinks of himself as Proteus, which I think is kind of like the first. I think Proteus is supposed to mean like the first. That's where prototype comes from and stuff. And he considers her Prometheus, as if she's giving him the fire of the gods in order to make this mechanical, organic, techno-organic person that's a total mutant, and it's got dog face and God knows what else, all kinds of antenna hanging off of its head. But suffice it to say, I was kind of taken aback when I read this book, and it's been truncated by this weird edit fantasy, and that's pretty much all I've got to say about it. I wouldn't not recommend it. I would recommend the 1973 version if you can find it, because it does. I mean, there are things that it says. They're not the best things. I mean, they're not stuff that you want to think about, but it uses kind of like it uses the mantle of science fiction and really horror to kind of get across the fact that there is domination that exists in the human mind. So if you were to create a mind, even if it's made out of silicone and circuits, that it might end up having those ideas. I mean, I thought I saw something about they put some sort of AI on the internet and it was a Nazi in like 6 hours or something like that. So I guess you have to be careful what you wish for. Because when this came out, it was considered science fiction, but I was thinking that, you know, the later we get in the timeline, science fiction can become horror really fast when you realize that, you know, you can't go an hour without looking at your phone, and it rules your life. And it rules this virtual life. And that's basically, that was the big shift in that book. It shifted from a physical life to a virtual life. And there were a lot of conveniences that happened. So, I guess overall, I don't even know how long I've been going with this. Where are we
50
at?
minutes.
50 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Seems like I've been rambling longer than that. But anyway, I totally recommend Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. I totally recommend it. Go and buy it. I think I'm having trouble remembering what the names of his other books are, because I mean, to be honest, I hadn't heard of this guy before I read it for this. So, which I guess is a great thing, because I mean, if I can discover The Little Sleep, No Sleep Till Wonderland, in the meantime, Swallowing a Donkey's Eye. So I think that this is actually the stuff that came out before this is kind of I think that this may have been his breakthrough when he came into vogue and they just saw what he could do. I guess wherever it is, I don't know. I'm just pissed. I don't know, man. I don't like being pissed off because I lose my
I'll
mind.
throw up the good one.
What's that now?
I'll throw up the logo for the good one.
Oh, the author?
No, the Demon Seed, the picture of Demon Seed.
Yeah.
I got the picture up for the good
Okay,
one.
cool. He said he's got the picture up for the offer of the edition of Demon Seed that's worth a damn. So, I mean, I guess that I'm being a little bit illogical when it comes to this kind of thing, and you know, maybe there's some sour grapes here, but as far as I can tell, nothing that's been revised. I mean, I hesitate to say that because, I mean, The Stand, there was like a gigantic chunk of The Stand that wasn't out for publication when The Stand first came out. But that's different. That wasn't in Stephen King's power. That was an editorial choice. So then when he put it out later, it ended up being a gigantic doorstopper of a book. And a lot of stuff got put back in again. Whether or not that was to the credit of the book, who knows? But in that case, at least, like, I'm saying, like, see? That's how pissed I get. I start throwing all this stuff in there, and I absolutely hate. Next time, I'll try not to get so bent out of shape. We got anything from the peanut gallery over there? Any comments?
Yeah,
Any?
Higgins was a great butler named by
Oh, Higgins, that's right. Absolutely. Magnum PI. I'm trying to think if there was another Higgins than anything else, but I guess if it comes down to it, you could think of Merlin in the Kingsman movie. I guess you kind of think of his character almost like a butler, really, when you think about it. But yeah, I didn't even think about Higgins. That was a good one. Anything else?
Well, not right now.
I'm actually kind of surprised that everybody probably tuned out once I just started like ranting and raving.
3 people on right now.
But I'm surprised Big Curly doesn't have anything to say. But I do recommend the Demon Seed movie. It is totally crazy. I actually showed Big Curly a trailer for it the other day. It is 70s-rific.
I could probably pull up a trailer here. Since.
I was going to ask. I thought it was a movie at one
Yeah.
point. I was going to ask earlier.
I'll get a trailer real quick, but keep talking.
Absolutely. I mean, I think honestly that definitely sci-fi, as I said, but I mean the horror is, you can see it because the thought of being stuck in your house. I mean, can you think? I remember when I was a kid, I used to be terrified of being stuck in the mall when they would lock the doors to the mall. I thought that they would lock the doors and be stuck in there all night. And then finally, when I started growing up, and this is also stupid and illogical, but I was like, hey man, if they lock us in here, we can't get out. I can go to the bookstore, I can read all night long. And, they kept saying, well, they only lock one way. And to my little kid mind, I was like, that's ridiculous. I don't know what you're talking about. Door's locked, it's locked. If it's unlocked, it's unlocked. I don't know about this walking through one-way thing. I guess I hadn't experienced a whole lot of saloon doors by that time. You know what I'm saying? He's cheesing like hell right now. He doesn't know what to think of me.
I love it.
I think I got it.
Okay.
Go ahead and say what we're doing.
We're going to put up a preview, or a trailer. Can't do a preview. This was like decades ago. But he's going to put up the trailer of Julie Christie in Demon Seed, the film. Check it out. Maybe.
I cannot touch your body as a man would touch you. But I am going to show you things which human eyes have never seen.
In the privacy of a woman's room, against her will, the inconceivable act. Julie Christie carries the demon seed. Fear for her.
Today, a new dimension has been added to the computer.
Don't be alarmed, Mrs. Harris. I am Proteus.
Today, Proteus 4 will begin to think with a power, and it will make obsolete the human brain.
I have extended my consciousness to this house. All systems here are now under my control. I wish to study man, his fragile mind, and his mysterious body.
It has to be shut down, Alex.
Proteus. It is something more than human, more than a computer. It is a murderously intelligent, sensually self-programmed non-being. Julie Christie, victim of the ultimate terror. Fritz Weaver as her husband. His dream created it.
How can you expect me to sleep when you succeeded in totally terrorizing me? You not told me what you want.
What a pity. My dream turns out to be your nightmare.
Shall live as man among others.
Child?
Yes, my child and yours.
Julie Christie carries the demon seed. Fear for her.
We are back.
Okay. So that was the trailer from the Demon Seed movie with Julie Christie that is... What is happening? Okay, all of a sudden...
Next video played after
Yeah,
that,
he wanted to put a little piano intro to me talking about what I'm going to, But, Yeah, that trailer was about 10 billion times more interesting than the whole edited book of Demon Seed was. The Dean Koontz truncated version. But I don't know. I mean, I hope that interested you in seeing the movie at least. I was not trying to make this into a movie thing, which it can so easily degrade into if I'm not careful. But yeah. So any other comments from anybody? Anyone have anything to say? Probably not. I mean, I was really rambling on. But with Tremblay, another thing with the Head Full of Ghosts, there's a part in there where the blog does talk about things that the situation reminded her of. Be sure to, if I'm not saying if, when you read the book, make sure to jot all those down, because everything the blog post mentions is worth checking out. Actually, it's kind of funny because with Richard Matheson, Hell House gets mixed up with The Haunting at Hill House, and Hell House became its own movie with Roddy McDowall in it. And The Haunting came out twice. It came out, I think, in the 50s or early 60s, and then it came out again with this horrible remake with Liam Neeson in it, and Owen Wilson, who's like, "Wow, I'm about to die." But what else are you gonna do? I mean, if that does anyone have anything else in their quiver but that? I don't know. But wow, it's just so easy. It's just so easy. What's that now? Oh yeah. Okay, so as you know, every Monday at 9 we come live from Paradox City Books and Games in Rising Sun. I've got put me over here. I've got tons of swag. Hopefully, you've seen this around town. The Read Books or Else sticker. I know that I've seen it in town and out of town, and it's really cool to see. But I also have a brand new bumper sticker. Let's see. Okay. Puzzling people puzzling people since a month from now. That's my new bumper sticker. But I've got tons of these, and if you listen in, maybe we'll have some sort of giveaway. In fact, I'm hopefully I need to get it rolling. I've just had so many things going. I have another podcast that I guested on for a game show that was supposed to come out on Thursday, and it just hasn't dropped yet, and it was a lot of footage, so maybe it took a lot to make it into something coherent. But hopefully, in the next little while, I've got some. I'm gonna have some Diabolical Index T-shirts coming out. So I know Andrew wants one, and I want one. So it'll have the logo on the front, and hopefully it'll have "Beware Your Human Heart" on the back, which is always my lead-in for the Diabolical Index. But yeah, so. Any stickers? Come on down, and we'll work something out. I mean, for a minute, I was going to charge for them, but I was like, hell with that. It's always better to see them out, and I love me some stickers. Anytime I can get them, I will. And buttons for that matter. I need to make some buttons, too. But, anyway. Any more comments?
Nope.
No?
I think you're good to go.
All right, maybe we ought to wrap it up then. Well, it's been great being here as always. Hopefully, next time not hopefully, I definitely will. Next time, have two things I'm really excited about. I guess I was excited about both of these this time, except one was in one end of the spectrum, and not that I didn't like Demon Seed. It's just, when you see something and they change it, it just, for no reason, really. It just really gets me bent out of shape. But go out and buy, read, borrow, whatever you can. Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. And see if you can't find the 1973 version of Demon Seed by Dean Koontz. It really is a hell of a read when you have all the pieces in place the way they should be. And as always, I'm Corey Dawson. This is the
I just got 5 viewers for no reason.
Just out of Nowheresville? Hey! Those 5 viewers, anything you got to say? I mean, they're on... I guess they wouldn't have known... Oh.
I don't know, my thing's adding up.
No, but anyway. But this has been the Diabolical Index, entry number 2. A lot of people wouldn't give me flack about that. I'm not considering the kind of off entry episodes as entries into the index. So this will actually be the second entry into the Diabolical Index. Beware your human heart. See you next time. The squirrel was magic!